Holy shit. Come on, come on. There it is. Fuck yeah. To open my eyes, leave it all behind. So open your mind and realize that you're beautiful. Wow. That's just so stupid. Savage. 7 seconds. Just let me breathe. The air is leaving and I'm lost in need of you again. Okay, that is something. 7 seconds. Oh my god. Oh my goodness. Since we fell in love. See ya. Yo guys, what is up? Max in our first Descendant video, and today we're going over my build guide for Lepic. Now, this is a character that has some of the craziest boss damage potential in the game. However, when setting up this build, I didn't want to make it just a bosser. I've tried to keep a lot of quality of life in the build, so we've still got some HP, we've still got some defense, and we're going to be going over a mobbing setup. Obviously, the bossing is the big flashy thing, but I hope you guys enjoy the build and how I've set it up so that you can swap between using this character, not only to delete some of the strongest bosses in the game insanely quickly, but also be able to use it out on missions. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get right into it. Before we dive into the video, I know I'm not the first person to post like a boss nuking Lepic build. I'm sure there are a ton of others who have made guides on this. However, I did test everything myself during the course of a 15-hour stream, and I got a ton of help from chat. And so I wouldn't have been able to make this guide without the help of chat, and I'm sure chat was well informed from the amazing guides of other content creators. And so I'm just grabbing a bunch of other creators' builds, and I'm going to be putting them all in the description if you want to compare and contrast my guide. Maybe they did it better than me, but I just wanted to share that I know that I'm not the first person to do this, but I did test everything for this build myself. To start us off, because I've never made a Lepic guide, I want to just quickly walk you through the skills, and then we'll get into like the gear and everything else that you need to know. So to start us off, Lepic has a grenade throw. It's got pretty solid base damage. It does not do any sort of extra things unless you activate his 2. Overclock. Now, Overclock's a really interesting ability. We can modify it with multiple Transcendent modules, and Overclock, when we click it, is going to allow our grenades to burn, but also our overkill to burn. Now, this burn is actually a fairly decent skill power modifier, which we'll talk about in a second. But it allows us to not only inflict a bunch of burns, but it's going to give us this buff with 20% skill power modifier, which will also increase our burn damage. And the duration of it for this build is going to be like 33 seconds. So this is something that's basically always up, because its cooldown with this setup is 20 seconds. So you just have 100% uptime on some really awesome burn damage. Next up, his 3 traction grenade. I think that this is low-key one of the most slept on abilities in the game. It doesn't display that it scales its range up. However, it does. And you're able to pull in like an entire map if you're like familiar with like Warframe and like Vauban, where you could just pull and vacuum like literally an entire map to you. You can absolutely do that with this traction grenade, which we'll be breaking down in a second. And lastly, his 4 overkill. This is the real showstopper of Lepic's kit. It's going to allow you to transform your arm into a unique weapon. This is the unique weapon is very particular because it counts as swapping weapons, which means that like weapons that you can hold as a stat stick don't actually work because you're swapping to off your stat stick to the unique weapon. And then you're able to fire out multiple shots. These shots are going to be based off of your duration, and they're going to be constantly consuming mana. There's a really fine like tightrope line that you need to walk with this 4 in order to be able to not only shoot as many times in the duration, but also not run out of mana during this duration. And if you can walk that line and get as many shots out as quickly as possible, this becomes one of the strongest, if not the strongest, damage ability in the game. It's got its own burst damage, and it's got its own like continuous damage, and then you can add more burn damage to it. It's kind of disgusting. And that is Lepic's kit. And lastly, his passive skill, which right now we've changed when we're going to be using Firearm Master, which is our Transcendent module. Whenever we change weapons, we're going to be getting more skill power modifier. When we hit our 4, it counts as changing weapons because we're going from our main weapon to the unique weapon. So every time we click our 4, we're getting another 30% or 39% skill power modifier on it, which will be scaling our burn damage even more. Now we get into our reactor. For your reactor, you're gonna be looking for fire skill power and tech skill power, and your mounting doesn't actually really matter that much. What I did is I farmed a ton of reactors, and whenever I got my god roll reactor, I went out and I just farmed the perforator. I didn't have the perforator before this, but this reactor roll was so good that I wanted to just go get one so I could use it. And I think our god roll is skill critical hit damage and additional skill damage when attacking Colossus. This is going to give you more base damage, and then we're going to be scaling up that Colossus damage even more, so you get tons of return on that Colossus skill attack. Also, crit damage rolls really high, so it's a massive damage increase. Now, crit hit rate is also a solid stat. I just want to show you this real quick. So this is when we go to our info. This is my current skill critical hit rate. It is 46%. If I put on a reactor, that is going to give me a golden 32.2% increased skill critical hit rate. Once again, that's a percentage increase on our base. So I'm only getting around 4% or 4 to 5% actual skill hit crit rate on this, where I could be getting a massive damage increase against Colossus when I do crit. And so that's what we're going for on our reactor for this build. Now let's talk about our weapons. Now, the weapon that I'm using for our bossing damage, the stats on it, everything doesn't matter. This is the build that I'm rocking. The two things that do matter are the fact that your 4, while you're shooting it, scales off of your fire rate. So using fire rate up will give us 25% increased fire rate, and then sharp precision shot, while it will give us lower fire rate, while we are in our ultimate shooting it, we're going to be building up fire rate. The recoil firearm attack, that doesn't benefit us. What does benefit us is the ability to get another 40% fire rate, and that's why you see the 4 building up and shooting faster and faster during our bossing clips. Now, the most important thing with sharp precision shot is that you have to hold down the trigger of your 4. If you roll, if you get knocked down, you are completely knocked out of sharp precision shot, and then you are actually losing damage because you're still having that negative 20% fire rate. So just to give you an example, let's cast our 4, and I'll do it while holding down the trigger, and then I'll do it without sharp precision shot. So here is our 4. Another little trick with the 4 is you want to roll. You can cancel its long animation just by rolling as soon as you click it. But you'll see that we're able to like kind of speed out our shots at the end here, and we can fire a bunch of times. Now let's do that test real quick. Let's take off both of those fire rate mods just to show you. Now let's do that again. Pull out our alt. And now this is our speed for the whole ultimate. This is a massive DPS loss. So the biggest thing with the weapon that you're using for your mount is that you are getting a mount that can use sharp precision shot. The weapons that can use sharp precision shot are... So I almost made a bit of a mistake here. They're actually not all even, these sharp precision shots. They can roll on impact, special, and general rounds. However, only the one on impact rounds goes to a 0.4 second stacking, versus the other ones are going to go to a 0.5 stacking. And so the impact rounds are technically the best because you'll be able to stack up the fire rate the fastest, versus the other ones stack up their fire rate slightly slower. It's not the world's biggest deal, but if you're trying to min-max, you do want to get your mounting for an impact rounds weapon. Next up, we get to talk about our Enduring Legacy. No, I'm not finished with this build yet, obviously. I've still got some work to do, and I will probably have a separate build guide on my Enduring Legacy. once I fully tested and min-maxed everything, but I just wanted to show you guys what I'm working with right now. So I built it fully around crit. We're at 36% crit hit rate with a 5 times damage multiplier. It kind of came with this R polarity, so I've just got some extra accuracy, which actually feels pretty good. But your standard run-of-the-mill crit mods with fire rate up. I plan on using Fire Conductor when we're mobbing. That's going to be like my go-to mobbing mod to constantly give us extra fire damage. And I want to put fire mod in this last slot and try to kind of build it up as a little bit of a dot gun, which I think could be really fun because as we're going to be buffing up our firearm attack, our firearm damage scales off of our fire. And also dots, I found this out today in testing this gun. Dots can actually scale off of the crit if the crit procs the dot. So I think we could actually get some really cool like things where we're hitting burning enemies, which is scaling our firearm attack. Our burn is scaling off of our firearm attack, and then we could just be kind of constantly ramping dots. Unfortunately, this thing doesn't have great status effect trigger rate, so I'm going to try to mess around with rolling that on. But for like bossing, I'd probably either use mental focus on this thing for some extra juice on it in its damage, but I also think sharp precision shot is a really fun option. Just to give you an idea of what this looks like with sharp precision shot, which gives us even more fire rate. Oh, here, let me get a full mag real quick. Reload, so we cancel that. But the fire rate just gets kind of insane. So yeah, I think that's going to be pretty fun to mess around with. But once again, still got some more testing to do. I just wanted to show you guys what I was working with. Real quick, I just want to show you guys the budget setup. We're going to do a quick little boss kill, and then I'll walk you through the budget setup. But budget setup is just basically grabbing the very core basic needs of this build, and you still deal like a lot of damage. So this is our like budget setup versus Devour. You'll see that we're obviously hitting for less, but you know, we still got a very, very quick Devour kill. So this is the budget setup. You don't need all of these things like the crazy expensive bossing setup to be able to melt bosses. The core of the build, we're gonna get some HP so that you don't die and Reddit doesn't yell at me. We're gonna get Fire Specialist for more power, Dangerous Ambush for that massive damage increase whenever the boss goes down. We've got our skilled chance and our skilled damage, and then we've got skill extension for we get enough of duration. This is the core of the build. These are the most important mods. Everything else is just added quality of life and damage. But as long as you can get these things going, you're still gonna be melting bosses without having to invest very much into this character. Now let's get to talk about in our bossing build. Now, one of the things that I wanted to make clear is I wanted to have a Lepic that could be used in solo, but also in groups. I didn't want to use things that hampered his cooldown, like maximize skill or skill simplification, or maximize power, where we're basically increasing our cooldown by a ton and making the character basically unplayable in groups unless I'm constantly jumping off of a cliff to kill myself to get my ult back. I just didn't want to give you guys a build that you'd have to be forced into that playstyle. This build is still doing tons and tons of damage. It's not the absolute most amount, but it's still enough to like one cycle Swamp Walker and kill basically every boss in the game without losing too much quality of life, which was important to me. So let's go over the mods. To start, Battle of Stamina gives us max HP and a little bit more duration. Duration and MP are going to be really big important factors for us. Then we've got our 4 skill crit mods: Skill Crit Insight, Concentration, Frontlines, and Emergency Measures. These are all kind of non-debatable. Lepic and the 4 scales really well with crit, so these are all must-have mods. Another must-have mod is a way to boost up our power. I want to take the time just real quick to explain why power is so important here. So power is a increase on our base damage. So if you have something that is a large multiplier or a large modifier, power is going to be the best thing to boost it. If I add modifier, modifier is additive with other modifier. So for example, if I add skill simplification, which is 84% more modifier, to our 4, which is already at like 2,700, even though this is 84% increased damage, it actually only nets out to about a 3% damage increase on the 4. However, modifier is still useful for us because we can use it to scale the things that have lower modifier. So as you'll see, we do have a dot that's a very small modifier. It's 43. We're more than doubling the damage of the dot on the 4. And the burn is also has a dot, and modifier is helpful for that. But modifier is not really doing anything for the actual damage of our shots on our 4. Just kind of technicality that I wanted to point out to you guys. So power and modifier are going to be important, and we're going to be using technician to scale up the modifier of not only our 4 dot but also our 2. We're using technician because these are scaling separately. It's not a just a tech or just a singular, so we're getting burn damage on both of those. I messed around with a lot of kills using technician, swapping it to strong mentality for skill cost. I messed around with maximize conservation, which lost a little bit of modifier and kept our shots up a bit more. I also messed around with enlightenment for even more MP, but I found that this setup was kind of the right balance of getting a lot of damage on our dots, which were impactful, and also being able to shoot a lot of shots. We're also going to be using skill extension for more duration. We're going to be popping MP accelerant for even more duration and more max MP. I found that this little bit of MP was quite helpful. There is maximized duration, for example, that you could use here. This gives us more duration, but I found that it didn't really matter because if I didn't have a little bit of extra MP, the extra duration was wasted. So you could pair, like I messed around, for example, with maximized duration, and then I've got a ton of duration, and then you can go for like extra MP with something like enlightenment. And all of this testing that I found of basically like getting more shots. We could squeeze out a few more shots with this setup here, but we're losing a lot of damage on our modifier, and so that's kind of why I went with the setup that I did. The last thing to mention is our dangerous ambush. This is mainly to give us a massive increase to our damage while a boss is immobilized, aka that they are down on the ground. If you aim Lepic's 4 at weak points, you won't do weak point damage. It doesn't increase your damage, but you will actually break parts. And if you're breaking parts, you can down the boss in this. And that's really important, not only to deal more damage because of our dangerous ambush, but so that they don't go immune while you're shooting at them. So while you're shooting this thing, you do want to be kind of aiming for weak points, not at the sake of missing your shots. It's more important to hit your shots. But if you can kind of hit some weak points while you're shooting this, you will get more consistent kills. Next up, we get to talk about our mobbing setup. Now, my mobbing setup is a little bit, I've got some mods in the red. That is because we did optimize for bossing. However, I didn't want to neglect the mobbing setup, and so I thought of something really cool, and that is using Lepic's 3. Now, Lepic's 3 is a traction grenade that pulls in enemies. However, it doesn't scale with range, or at least that's what the game tooltip tells you. It does indeed scale with range, and we can make it one of the coolest skills in the game by adding as much range as possible. So we're going to be using maximize range, which gives us even more range, skill expansion, which gives us even more range, and actually firearm master. You probably wouldn't think to use this for bossing, but when we reload our weapon, we get 45% skill range. This is allowing us to get over 200% range on this thing, which is absurd. And you could make a really, really crazy build around this. I didn't invest into duration because it only has like a 2-second duration, so percentage increases in duration aren't going to do much. But let's show you how this looks. So now we spawn in some level 100 enemies. We're going to make sure that we do a little reload, throw down R3, pull in everything, and now we've got a thunder cage to just explode everything. And that is the way that goes. And we're prioritizing a ton of cooldown. So R3 is already back up, and you can kind of just keep spamming this to group up enemies. We've also got a fair bit of damage on our setup with Fire Specialist to give us more base damage, which once again, we're going to be throwing grenades. Grenades don't really care too much about modifier. They do care about some base damage. And we're going to be putting on Overclock, which is going to also have a pretty solid uptime on this setup. It's on a 7-second cooldown with how we've set this up. So you're constantly going to be getting the skill power increase to throw your grenades, constantly burn enemies, and then you can just throw the grenades, pull in enemies, constantly explode them with fire and your thunder cage. And it's a pretty cool setup. We are going to be neglecting the 4 on this setup. You could obviously use it if you wanted to, but we really wanted to just kind of like be able to spam our grenades and be able to constantly pull in enemies. Now let's talk about components. For general mobbing, it really doesn't matter. I just set mine up to get as much max HP as possible, just to feel pretty good. So I went Annihilation set. I'd like to do 2-piece Annihilation, 2-piece Volcanic for a little bit more duration and a little bit more damage. I didn't have that quite set up, but I did grab an HP auxiliary power, a Volcanic Sensor with max HP, HP recovery, and MP recovery, Annihilation set with max HP defense, MP recovery, and then Annihilation processor with some max HP, equipment, and toxic resistance. Once again, mobbing don't really matter all that much. For bossing, you're going to want to wear the Slayer set. I didn't have a very good Slayer set at all. I just kind of threw some things together. But the things that you're looking for on your auxiliary power, you want mana recovery out of combat. If you shoot Lepic's 4 at a boss, until the projectile actually hits the boss, you're out of combat. So if you have mana recovery out of combat, you can regen the amount of mana that the shot was going to cost while it's traveling towards the boss. So you basically get an extra free shot if you can roll mana cost or mana out of combat on your top slot. On your Slayer sensor, I've got max MP of the possible rolls. You would want a large max MP roll for extra shots with your 4, and then you can also roll MP recovery in combat. This is the other like god roll. Once again, I didn't have that for this video, unfortunately. Then for your memory, I did actually have the thing I needed, which is MP recovery modifier. Once again, general theme is if you can roll MP on it, you're looking for it on your Slayer sets, the more MP that you can get, the more shots that you can get out, the more damage you get to deal. And then your processor doesn't really matter. There's nothing really that benefits us. You could go for some extra resistances here on this slot roll. But mainly, it is very important to try to find max MP and MP recovery modifiers and MP in combat or out of combat. All of these things will significantly improve your experience with spamming your 4 out. For mobbing, you want to look for a reactor with skill range and skill cooldown. I didn't get the right like weapon here. I'd probably just look for a purple one, to be honest, so I could swap my weapons around. But skill range and skill cooldown will also help your mobbing setup a ton. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. Let me know what character you would like to see covered next on this channel. I had a ton of fun with Lepic. And yeah, guys, I will catch y'all in the next one. Take care. Peace.